None of this changes who you are. I don't wish jail on nobody. But you're a criminal. A bad guy just like me.
You made me this way, Kay. Come on, man. This is who I am. This is who I was all along.
Now, in today's breakdown, we are going to be talking about whether Ghost sending Kanan to prison could have been a form of delayed justice. In one of my previous breakdowns, we went through the question of whether Kanan was actually the villain of Power, or was that actually Ghost? We went through Kanan's perspective and point of view based on something 50 Cent teased, where he portrayed Ghost as a villain, more selfish and a grimy character, especially when it came to the move that Tasha and Ghost made by sending Kanan to prison. It was no doubt a very grimy move on someone that he loved and someone that he considered to be a brother. Even though he was and continues to be a fan favourite, let's not beat around the bush. Every character on Power is flawed in some shape or form, and no doubt Ghost also had many flaws in many different ways. Previously I also said, picture this, you've never seen an episode of Power before. You start watching Power by watching Raising Kanan first. You see how Kanan was brought up through manipulation, lies, deceit that shaped his particular character. You then watch Power Origins, where potentially all Kanan ever did was be a big brother to Ghost, only to then have Ghost backstab Kanan and set him up to further his own ambition. You then watch Power After in that particular order. Just imagine how different your perspective would be on that particular relationship and those two characters as a whole. If you didn't think it already or thought about it before, many of you would probably be saying Ghost deserved that shit. However, in this particular breakdown, we are going to be flipping the script. A scenario which could reframe Ghost's betrayal of Kanan not just as ambition and a grimy move, but as a form of delayed justice. Instead of calling Ghost a grimy character, we're going to look at whether his actions were justified. We're going to take a look at various different angles from Care to St. Patrick's death, as well as tying in how his upbringing and drive to go legit also supports the other perspective. An argument for Ghost rather than Kanan, how he was someone who wanted more than just to be in the drug game, a game which he knew only ends in two ways, death or jail, how from the beginning of Power he wanted out of the game, but those around him never shared the same vision, how he only wanted the best for his family throughout Power and even after he passed. With that being said, let's start with the story of Ghost sending Kanan to prison, just from the point of view of Ghost.
Ghost and Tommy kept coming around talking about some shit I wasn't down with. So he got rid of me by sending me to prison.
Back then I had big plans. Big plans that Kanan couldn't see. So it was either set him up for him to go away or it was me killing him.
Now, back in Power Season 2 Episode 9, we did hear a conversation between Ghost and Sean. It was a rare moment of honesty where Ghost gave the backstory of why he sent Kanan to prison, which definitely is important to lay the foundation with for the rest of this breakdown. He told him that it was true, he did send Kanan to prison, because back then he had big plans. He was ambitious, he had a vision and a plan that Kanan couldn't see, very similar to the death of Breeze. He was said to be in the way of his future, and the same could probably be said about this situation here. Now, in a nutshell, Ghost was pretty crystal clear about what he was trying to tell us. Kanan basically couldn't see the bigger picture. We know from Power this was a man who was very ambitious, always challenging himself in the real world to be bigger and better. He was someone who was never afraid to go up against the best to make that happen. For example, Simon Stern. If you want to be the best, you have to take out the best.
Simon, I didn't get where I am by following. I lead. I turn from potential ally back to competitor. I don't think you want that. May the best man win. I will.
Now, back in the day, I'm sure that's exactly the mindset Ghost had, but more from a street perspective, when Ghost was just a regular corner boy hustling the corners for Breeze and Kanan. At some point, he would have probably realized he wasn't just content being a corner boy, or like we see him in one of the BTS videos for Power Origins, more of a mid-level drug dealer in the early 2000s, where he's got a crew of his own. He would have realized that's not enough. He would have been thinking, I want more. I've got big plans. Just like he constantly used to say in Power, I've got this, I've got a plan. Back in the day, he had big plans to potentially take the drug game in a different direction, maybe make their operation more sophisticated, just like we saw in Power. How there was a real distance between Ghost and the streets, not many people were able to put a face to Ghost's name. His operation was also built on finesse with the courier system. Maybe he wasn't happy with the way Kanan was running things, maybe he wasn't happy with Kanan acting more reckless, or maybe it was just Tasha and Ghost here, just like we discussed in the previous breakdown. But one thing I have zero doubt with, Ghost probably had a long-term vision of going legit, that Kanan probably couldn't see and that he was never down for. Just like Tommy couldn't see it way back in Power Season 1.
We've been hustling together our whole lives. I love this shit. So do you. So focus up.
Now, what we know of Kanan back in power, and even traits that we're now seeing in Raising Kanan from a younger Kanan, he's a character who is street through and through, very similar to Tommy in that respect. No doubt one of the best chess players that we've seen in the game in power as well, and after the teaser that they just released for Raising Kanan Season 5, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he got this from Breeze. But he was also a character who was very chaotic, violent, impulsive, reactionary, especially the younger Kanan, and no doubt, he definitely is the type of character who would never have had a long-term strategy of going legit. That's where both of them would have most likely clashed in terms of their ideology, very similar to how Ghost and Tommy used to clash in power.
We got a business. We got a legitimate fucking business.
One more time with that fucking shit. That's your business. This is my business. It's the only thing I was ever good at.
Now, we have often said in many breakdowns over the past few years that Tommy's more like Kanan rather than Ghost. He definitely does have traits of Ghost within him, no doubt, but Tommy's more like Kanan in the sense he is street through and through, and nor does he want any other life either. He's a character who will always live and die by the sword, which also would have contributed towards Ghost and Tasha not telling Tommy about their plan in terms of sending Kanan to prison, because Tommy would never have been down with it. Whereas with Ghost, he was always different. His plans were with him seeing a life beyond the streets, just like he told Tasha.
It's our escape plan.
Escape from what?
I don't know any old wrinkled drug dealers. They're either dead or inside, Tasha.
Now, from Ghost's point of view, you can argue he had no choice but to move Kanan out the way. Like he told Sean, it was either a bullet or prison, and he chose a more merciful option because at the end of the day, he still loved Kanan. It was a strategic move which at the time was made out of necessity, because in the streets, if someone's blocking your path to the top, it really is simple. You move them out the way. Just like the example we gave with Ghost versus Simon Stern. Simon Stern was in the way of his future, and we saw how he clashed with him many times throughout Power, where Ghost had to essentially move Simon Stern out the way, not to only keep what he built with Club Truth, but to also build on what he built. Same thing with Kanan. He was in the way of Ghost's future. At the end of the day, the game is the game, and Kanan really should have seen it coming. But just like he never saw it coming from Tariq, he never saw it coming from Ghost. Now, what we discussed in the previous breakdown was Ghost's selfish and grimy nature. He told Sean that he was there for him during a really tough moment in his life, which was when his father, Curtis St. Patrick, died, which is something we're going to come to in detail in just a moment. But in this moment when Ghost betrayed Kanan, he made the choice of backing his plans and vision over loyalty, which ties in with something Courtney Kemp said over and over again around how the show is about consequences and choices. The characters on Power are all flawed, and as anyone who watches the show can tell you, the good sometimes do die young. Sometimes in the case of Ghost's teenage daughter, Raina, she was very young, but the series is about the consequences for their actions. The characters always cause their deaths, one way or another. Everyone has a choice. Now, in that particular moment, Kanan made his choice, just like we're seeing throughout Raising Kanan. He's been making his own choice for a very long time. We can always argue about how these characters have never had a choice because of their upbringing, early influences, and the world that they grew up in, and it definitely is a point I'm going to come back to with Ghost in just a moment. But at one point, they definitely did have a choice. Kanan had the choice to go to Stuyvesant, just like Ghost had the chance to go to Choate, but they didn't. Now, over here in terms of Ghost's big plans, Ghost had a very difficult decision to make. If he doesn't remove Kanan and follow his ambition, then he probably ends up in the same cycle of either ending up dead or in jail. At some point his mindset switched when he was younger, where he was thinking, I want more. I want more than just to be on the streets. I want more than just to be a corner boy, because if I don't, I'm just gonna end up like the rest of these drug dealers. Or he removes Kanan, which would then allow him to follow his vision and plans. So in that moment when Kanan couldn't see the plans that Ghost had, he really had no option but to move Kanan out the way. And he also did it by framing him instead of killing him. He showed restraint when it came to Kanan because he loved him for what he did for him, and instead he sent him to prison. It was Ghost's way of trying to do the right thing in that moment, which, let's be honest, the game is the game. You gotta take out the best to be the best. Whether it's morally right, that's a different argument that we've already been through. From Ghost's point of view, Ghost didn't betray Kanan because he was grimy. He removed Kanan out the way because he was basically an obstacle that would have kept him, Tommy, Tasha, and his family trapped in the same deadly cycle that his father died in and that Breeze also died in. He wasn't listening to Ghost's ideas and visions, and that's what led Ghost to making the difficult decision to remove Kanan out the way. Does that really justify his actions in terms of betraying Kanan? Does it really change the fact that it was a grimy move? Probably not. But we can definitely understand it better, that's for sure. And we are going to continue looking at it from Ghost's point of view and how Ghost sending Kanan to prison could have also been a form of delayed justice.
I tried to tell your father, pay those drug deals to leave us alone. Then I tried to tell him not to talk to the police. That those kids were bad news.
Now, just to add to this, let's take a listen to what Courtney Kemp said in terms of who could have actually been behind his death.
Breeze and Kanan killed Curtis. I think that there is very much something there. I'm not going to say much more, but DMAC Money is thinking well. He's thinking well, yes.
Now, this really does make you think. It does make us ask the question, why on earth would Breeze and Kanan have anything to do with Ghost's father's death? It's something we have spoken about for many, many years. What really happened? Could Kanan and Breeze, or maybe just Kanan, have been involved and potentially pinned it on Breeze? First, you have to ask the question, why would Kanan want to get rid of Curtis St. Patrick? What's in it for him to get rid of a father of someone he really cared about? Well, we only have to look at what Snaps and Pop have recently done in Raising Kanan Season 3 and 4. How they've mentored, manipulated, lied and turned him against Rock to the point where they've pretty much had Kanan do all their dirty work for them, or at least gotten him to the point where he really is willing to pull the trigger on Rock. Why? They know a young Kanan Stark is the young and up and coming big thing in Queens, the son of Raquel and Defcon Stark, or at least they definitely believe he'd be Defcon's son. They believe it's in his blood, just like Detective Howard said early in Season 1. They know he's someone who will basically make them bank. It's as simple as that. They know Kanan Stark is the future, but to fully control someone like Kanan, you need him to turn against the Thomases. You need to get rid of the one person that will be a problem in pulling him away from you, and that's Raquel. You guys have all heard me talk about the cyclical nature of power and how there are constant themes across every power show, which is why I also make sure I tie in every single show together with whatever we're discussing in that particular moment. So, with that being said, you take it back to the situation with Kanan, Ghost and Curtis St. Patrick. If you go back to asking the question, what did Kanan really have to gain by getting rid of Ghost's father? The answer is pretty simple, especially when you look at the how, why and what Snaps and Pop have done. Same goes for Kanan and why he'd want to get rid of Curtis St. Patrick. Ghost would have been one of the best earners for Kanan and Breeze, just like Kanan is now going to be for Snaps and Pop. On one hand, Kanan was being pulled in the other direction by Rock, but Snaps and Pop would need to manipulate the situation to get control over one of their best soldiers. Same thing could be said for Kanan when it came to getting control over Ghost. It was said that Ghost's father tried to get Ghost to turn his back on the streets, but as the devil on Ghost's shoulder, just like how we saw Kanan being the devil on Tariq's shoulder, Kanan would have definitely been pulling him in the other direction. Again, the cyclical nature of power, Kanan would have done it to Ghost, and we saw history repeat it with Kanan and Tariq. Corrupting, mentoring and acting like a big brother to Ghost, more so to sway him in the direction of the streets, which in the end would benefit Kanan Stark. If Ghost doesn't have his pops, his mum isn't in the picture either. Even though Kate did take him in, she wasn't exactly the best role model or mother of the year. So who does Ghost turn to? Kanan and Breeze would have been his first real influences in the streets that would have put their arm around his shoulder and, just like Ghost said, be there for him. So just how much of this early relationship was built on lies and manipulation? I really do believe it's a very valid question in the build up to Power Origins. Now at this particular moment, it definitely is a hypothetical because we don't know whether it's true for sure. Courtney Kemp seemed to have it in her mind that Kanan and Breeze had something to do with it, but who knows whether Sasha Penn takes it in a different direction. But based on this hypothetical, would Ghost's actions in terms of sending Kanan to prison actually be a form of delayed justice, or would you still argue it's grimy? I do think you can probably argue both based on the hypothetical, and that's what I do think it is. It's both. Ghost is grimy, but at the same time, did Kanan deserve it? Based on this particular hypothetical, I do think they'll show us that he did. Now, if this theory does also prove to be true, it does also make Ghost's story arc more tragic, rather than him just being the villain. Because you look at what influenced Ghost at a young age, especially more so after Curtis St. Patrick's death, that would have been Kanan. Even though Ghost couldn't leave Tommy behind when he had the chance to go to Choate himself, you look at his upbringing, his mom's left, his father was killed, he grew up in Queens where he didn't know any better, and at that age you are heavily influenced by your experiences, your surroundings, and the people around you, and at the time, that would have definitely been the manipulative, lying, scheming, strategic Kanan Stark, who would have definitely been there for Ghost, no doubt. He would have helped turn Ghost and Tommy from boys into men, like they said in Power. But again, I'll ask you guys a question. How much of their early relationship was built on manipulation and lies, with Kanan potentially having a hand in Curtis St. Patrick's death? So while we explored the angle of Ghost potentially being reframed as the villain and a grimy character in Power Origins, where come the end, we will probably be saying he deserved that shit that he got in Power, this hypothetical backstory sure does flip the narrative. Even more so when we take into account From the beginning of Power, all he ever wanted was the best for his family.
When we met, what'd you think I was gonna be?
The biggest goddamn drug dealer in New York City.
You never thought about more.
What more? You talking about the club as more?
He wanted to leave the game, and he told Tasha very early on he doesn't know any old wrinkly old drug dealers. They're either dead or inside. Same thing with Tommy, but he just kept being pulled back in. Same thing with Tariq.
Huh? What do you want from me, boy? Teach me your motherfucking game, Ghost.
My father tried to get me to turn my back on the streets. I didn't listen. I don't want you to make the same mistake, son. Okay? I'm trying to protect you, man.
He refused to teach Tariq the game, and you could make a very good argument where he never actually lied to Tariq about who he was. He was actually protecting Tariq and shielding him from something he never needed to know. Ghost gave him a good life and a great head start that he never had when he was Tariq's age. Just have a look at how far Tariq was standing in the classroom scene in Power Book 2 Ghost. When Professor Milgram asked a question around inheritance, where they grew up, their background, and how they got to Stansfield, Tariq was standing almost right at the front, and that was down to Ghost. Ghost did that for him. Tariq had a huge head start in life that Ghost never had, that I never had, and that many of you probably never had. Even after Ghost passed, Tariq saw Ghost as controlling him by making him go to college to earn his inheritance, but I actually see it different. I see it as Ghost making sure that Tariq earned his right to his inheritance by keeping him on the right path, keeping him on the straight and narrow, because that's all he's ever wanted from day one. Ghost just wanted the best for the St. Patrick's. Now you can argue as the series progressed he did become more selfish. Again, we've already been through that argument, but you can't also put a blind eye to Ghost wanting to protect the ones that he loved, even after he passed. From what he did with his will to making sure Yasmin was well looked after just in case shit hit the fan, Ghost really did care from the beginning of Power, and all he ever wanted was out of the game, which Tasha and Tommy didn't back. And going back to the situation with Kanan, Kanan was never on board back in the day with his plan either. Now that's a wrap in terms of Ghost's point of view and how his actions in terms of sending Kanan to prison could be seen as delayed justice, how all he ever wanted to do was get out of the game from day one in Power, and had Tasha and Tommy been on board, even just one of them, things could have turned out very different. But despite everything that went on in Power, right at the end he still looked after those close to him, minus Tasha. So yes, we can definitely argue Ghost was selfish, he was a grimy character, but we can also make a very good case where he wasn't. And it definitely is now over to Power Origins to kind of give us those answers we're looking for, which will tell us the truth. Come the end, will we actually understand Ghost's decisions, or will we be saying, yeah, Ghost deserved that shit? It really is going to be interesting to see the how, why, and the truth in all things Power Origins. With that being said, drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.